as well. So she's going to be helping us, taking part of my job today. Thank you for that, Chris. Hi, Chris. Okay, she's going to be here at any point. And then we have Graham from Nottingham, UK. Hello, Graham.
Hi, Mariana.
And our helpers here, Rachel from Tormwater. Hi, Rachel. And Lisa from St. Albert, Alberta. Yes, got it. Okay, and I'm very, very happy today. Well, I'm kind of always happy.
Always happy.
But today, yes, I'm always happy. But today is a very special one for me because I have my dear Leonid Blyum with me. He rocked my world a while ago, and I'm so happy to be here with you, Leonid. And then my friend, new friend, where is he? I don't see you. Is Brad here? Dr. Brad Fullerton.
Are you here? You are. Back on.
Okay, you are. And I didn't know much about him until our tea party number 18. So I am so happy that we are doing this together, and I'm sure, everything good is gonna come out of this meeting. So I'm very excited, and welcome all of you, and thank you for being here. So, Leonid, are you ready for the toast?
Well, I mean, you see, I have a super big cup, so that should be we see some enthusiastic cats. Well, like one side, the other side, if you want. So, and well, this cat is probably not the best illustration for what we want to do today, because we want to talk about the situations when the center doesn't hold, right? So you see, this cat seems to be very centered. If you kind of appreciate that, well, or maybe it's a smaller one, it's also very centered. So that's supposed to be our kind of hosting opening, right? So you see the cheers to the center that we want to find. Oh, Mariana, you got some serious one, really.
Hear it.
Okay.
All right.
So then you wanted to
let's hear from the sponsors first, maybe?
First, okay. Yes, sounds good. Ram, the professional sponsor.
Thank you, Mariana. The Biotensegrity Party is an all-volunteer production of the Stephen M. Levin Biotensegrity Archive, made possible in part through the generous support of our wonderful sponsors. We'll start with the generous support of Chris Clancy's educational organisation, embodied Biotensegrity in Vancouver, British Columbia, and which provides an excellent resource for those of you looking to learn more about Biotensegrity. We then have Handspring Publishing in East Lothian, Scotland. We have a wide range of authors and books suitable for manual and movement therapy professionals, and have supported us from the beginning. They're offering a generous discount coupon to all those on the Biotensegrity Archive mailing list and our Zoom participants. Handspring also produce a weekly newsletter entitled Springboard, where you can join from their website, which provides details of the weekly webinar series Move to Learn, hosted by Elizabeth Larkham. The Biotensegrity Party is also sponsored by Artifact Pro of Madrid, Spain, where you can find Fernando's wonderful anatomical tensegrity models. Artifact Pro also offers a generous discount coupon to all our Zoom participants. And for those of you on Zoom, for those of you on YouTube, then link up with the Biotensegrity Archive, register for the tea parties, and you can get access to these discount codes as well. We're also very kindly supported by thefasciahub.com. Starts with a full day of talks on the fascial pelvis on Saturday, the 28th of November. So register soon with thefasciahub.com. And finally, we want to let you know that the recording of Integrated Biotensegrity in Alberta, Canada, a one-day course from last Saturday, is now available on their website. Features Lisa Babiot, Paul Thornley and Rachel Tudor. Do we have put their website in the chat for the Zoom participants at least? Okay, back to you, Mariana.
All right. Actually, I'm gonna butt in for a couple of seconds, okay. And I'm gonna say that that Fascia Hub pelvis event Neil Galloway's going to be there. Neil's here today. Joanne Avison's going to be there. I thought I saw Joanne. She might still be there. I can't see everybody. John Sharkey's going to be there. So, do check it out. Steve Levin is in Augsburg, Germany in a virtual kind of way today, giving a presentation for an osteopathic conference there. So he sends his regards, and the presentation he's giving them is going to sort of be the last formal tea party of the season on December 11th, I think. So you're going to get treated to that. You can look forward to it. Just to let you know the kinds of things that are going on in our biotensegrity aware world as well. We found an article on vibrational stability this week, and we're going to tweet you. We're going to put in the text the link to that. And one reason I thought, well, first of all, there's a very whole cool thing going on with what they're discovering in the article in terms of how hovering insects stabilize themselves in space. That has to do with their wing oscillations. And of course, we study oscillations as part of what we do. But what really cracked me up, sorry guys, is the opening line of the abstract. It is generally accepted among biology and engineering communities that insects are unstable at hover. And Rachel had exactly the same response I did to that. Why? Why are we ever assuming any biological life form is unstable? It's made it through, all these centuries and centuries of evolution. I mean, how could it be unstable? So it's our job to find that super stability and the things that give rise to it. The other thing is we had a couple questions about the title and such for today. And it's from a Yeats poem. It's a line from a Yeats poem called The Second Coming. So we've also got a treat for you that we'll put that link in the chat as well, because there are some lines in it that will pertain to your studies in biotensegrity. And then just lastly, I wanted to just take a second to introduce Mariana Barreto to you, because you already know her, but you may not know that she was 13 years old when she decided she wanted to work with CP kids. Now, I have had a very meandering sort of occupational pathway. I never had that kind of clarity about my life. And it is remarkable to me that she has been working on this for over 20 years. She met Leonid, I think, in 2009 and started following his work, and through working with Leonid, learned about biotensegrity soon after. And it's this thing that Leonid teaches that they're going to be talking about today, when the center cannot hold, when that, as you saw in the pictures, those of you who get the newsletter of Tom Fleming's squish toy, and I think Dorothea from the Tom Fleming's archive is also, hi Dorothea, here with us today. And, they use that as their illustration for the parents on what they can do to help restore the body when the center cannot hold. So I am really fascinated. And then Mariana went out on her own and stopped working with ABR and Leonid in 2017. But today, the band is back together. So, and Mariana was so taken with Brad's presentation a few weeks back that she said, oh my gosh, we've got to get these guys talking. So one conversation gives rise to another. And I'm just really excited to turn it over to you, Mariana, for today.
Thank you. Thank you, Susan, for that. And yes, I found Leonid in 2009, but I didn't meet him until the end of 2011, when he first went to Montreal. But it's a long story, and this is not today's topic. I want to share with you first to give, to start this conversation. Maybe let's ask everyone to turn off your video so we can just stay, the three of us, in the screen. But I'm going to share with you quickly a video that I made. That video is like 4 years old now, but the idea of the video came to me after I understood what Leonid was doing. And this is back in 2000, probably early 2011, or yeah, somewhere in 2011. So I told him, Leonid, this is a Jello with fruit. And he said, well, Mariana, this was his word always. You are so naive. And I said, well, that's the way I see it. Like today I understand a little bit more of how naive I was. But for me, I think my job in this world is to take all this, what we're doing here, and make it super simple so we can translate to parents. So I'm going to share with you my video of the Jello. Let me just share my screen quickly, because this is what I understood from this, right? If I didn't know much about fascia at the beginning, I only knew about the parts of the body, as I think most of us, we understood at the beginning, we learned at the beginning. So for me, the fruits were the parts that we knew from anatomy classes, and then the fascia was this Jello that we never pay attention to. And the way I understood what Leonid was trying to teach me was, okay, this Jello melts. It loses, back then he was talking about volume. So what I did this. I melted my Jello, okay? And then that's the problem that we have with kids with cerebral palsy. That's the way I see it. But then, okay, what Leonid does, and now I do it on my own, it's we're working manually to get that Jello back to its shape. And that's so far until I met Brad like a month ago or two. I don't remember exactly how far ago. I didn't know anybody else who was talking about this, building the tissue, building the tension, building the structure. Okay, I didn't know what prolotherapy was, my mistake. But I got it, okay, oh my God, there is another way to get this going. So that's exactly what I want to get today from this conversation. Okay, I know I'm really interested in the two of you talking about how you assess this. I know, Brad, you're using the ultrasound, okay? But like that's what I want. So I think I'm gonna pass this first, maybe to Leonid, so you can talk about your experience. You know, what you're seeing visually and with your hands that you're telling, oh yes, this is not holding, and then have that discussion there, and then eventually with Brad. We saw, for those of you who didn't see it, I think it's a Tea Party number 18, Brad presented real examples of what he's doing, so you can go back and watch those. But I'm sure we can talk about more about that today. So to you, Leonid.
Well, thank you, Mariana. So for some recollections, and I guess it's true that it was around, well, my first meeting with back then with Steve and Danielle happened at the Fascia Congress in 2009, and really it was like I kind of clicked on it right away, because that was that was really the thing which finally solved their trouble with with our big reference system, right? So it's like, why would be trying to deal with the thing which was sort of super unstable by definition, the whole idea of the like stacked vertebral column and so on. And that was finally somebody who was like taking a completely different perspective. And don't forget, right, that today the count of their sort of official recognized sciences sort of goes between 80,000 to about 100,000 disciplines. So it's actually well known that it was Gottfried Leibniz at the beginning of 1700s, who was supposed to be the last man to know everything. So that was like about 300 years ago. And of course, we are in that like super fragmentation, and you know, like most of those sciences, they would what count for maybe a few hundred people. So getting this bridge across the disciplines and bringing them into the field, that's really like what I specialize. See, you know, if you think about it this way, I'm the product of the Russian 90s, which was a really strange time. And on the one hand, it was really like wild and dangerous, but on the other hand, it was the period of the most sort of freedom, right? And I originally studied the cybernetics, like how to basically systems work, right? And then I got, you know, to work with my father, so who kind of recruited me to do some before and after videos, and I got hooked on viewing the movies about their, you know, like doing the comparison movies about the kids with cerebral palsy. And you know, to do that, I had to really slow down the videos, and you know, sometimes it's a piece of technology. Back then, it was the first time that those 6-head VCRs appeared, and so you can really get the, you know, you were able to get the stop frames which were like clear enough. And now when we look back, we understand this thing, right? Because our eye, when we look at the movement, you know, we don't really perceive things beyond like less than a few seconds. Less than a few seconds and less than a few, like a feet at least, right? But when we are looking inside the movie, so, and able to split it into the frames, so even the like 3-4 frames per second, that's would be the 200, 250, 300 milliseconds, right? So the real action, the real actions of the muscles, you know, they're firing, is actually happening in this range. And if we talk about the voluntary movement, it's even slower. So in that sense, once we start looking at the frames, we're able to look inside the movement. And when you look inside the movement, you really get perplexed. You know, like you say, wow, there's such a variety of the nuances and the shifts and the moves and so on. And that was really my original fascination. You see, like Mariana has got inspired with the cerebral palsy when she was 13, because, you know, she had an aunt working in the, you know, in the clinic, and she saw that suffering child and her heart melted, and she wanted to become a physical therapist and actually help those kids. You know, I'm, you know, very far from being such a nice person. You know, for me, it was a very, very technical solution. I said, okay, if I'm the person who has been trained in this kind of universal system science, so where would I apply my common, you know, my general skills of extracting the frameworks from one field and planting them into another? So, and then it was actually like just looking for the field of the maximum complexity. Like, for example, if you look at the, say, scoliosis, right? Scoliosis is something local. If you understand something about scoliosis, does it translate into a combination of scoliosis and the hip subluxation? No, because that's a more complex system, right? So you see, if you understand something about hip subluxation, scoliosis, and, for example, the foot deformity, that still doesn't cover it. So because every time you add the new component, you know, your previous knowledge becomes obsolete. In mathematical sense, you know, you have to go from a derivative, you know, from a derivative, you have to go to the integral, to the antiderivative. And every time you take an antiderivative, you know, you're creating a new system. So that's why I was actually really looking for the thing which would be the most complex, like include everything. And then on top of this, also include the neurological component, because you see, for example, we look at the simple things, right? And like, just to give you some indication of where we are, right? And why I was always bugged by the idea of the release. So let's say, like, what is the general logic in physical therapy? So, you know, we take a person who, for example, say, broken his arm, right? And got the like immobilization, especially 20, 30 years ago, they were seriously immobilized, right? And then the person comes out and we evaluate it with the range of motion and say, oh, this person has lost whatever, 20, 30 degrees of movement, and we can see some specific muscle shortening. So we start the physical therapy processes, which could vary, right? From just dumb stretching to finer things about the myofascial release or whatever, but we still pursue the same idea that it has shortened out of misuse, and that's why we need to lengthen this element. So that's kind of how the logic goes. And when it applies to the standard population, let's say 90% of the time, it works quite well. You go whatever, 10, 12, 20 physical therapy sessions, and you recover with your range, and then the world runs fine. Like, look, it has been short, now it's longer. We have, attacked the fascia shortening, gluing, and all these things, and then we kind of restore it. But then you try to apply the same logic, the same action to the children with cerebral palsy, and it spectacularly fails. So, I love getting quotes from the books like Treatment of the Upper Motor Neuron Syndrome, and or like because one of the first books that I actually ever read was the book, on medical books, was the book like that on management of the spasticity. And that book, I was like looking at that book, and then, I opened the chapter 13, and today is 13. I was born at 13. I opened the chapter 13, and they say, oh, like if everything else failed, we do the phenol injection. It's like phenol injection? That's chemical amputation. That means that you guys, you are actually like really thinking that that's a natural progression. So you can do this, but then you lose. It's always baffled me. So when we get back to the physical therapy of the stretching, and then like if you look at any official statements, what do they say? They say, even applying the American Association of whatever, the rehabilitation medicine, orthopedic surgeons and so on, recommends that every child gets brought through the range of motion for 2 hours a day, day in and day out. And then, but we don't know whether it works. And then the statement would be, there is more research needed. I said, well, guys, like if you look at that, the first documented, drawings of stretching come from 15th century. Like if you haven't figured out that the stretching doesn't work for 500 years, how many more centuries do you need to get this resolution, like another millennia? But then you have this convenient explanation. Well, we apply the stretching to the person who has lost 30 degrees of motion, let's say in the elbow, and it works. And now we move the same thing to the person with the cerebral palsy, and it doesn't work. So what is the most logical answer? The most logical answer, this brain is damaged, it sends wrong signals, our job is fine, we are fine, we understand everything perfectly, but this mystery brain just sends some damn wrong signals by making it artificially spastic. So until some nice people in the research laboratories learn how to fix the brain or replace it, the only thing which is left are Botox injections, and then there's some kind of cuts, stitches, and all these things. So this logic always bugged me, because as I'm being trained from the mathematical standpoint, first thing, equations, right? Equations, algebra and equations, which we're supposed to learn at grade 5, right? Well, if one side of the equation seems to be shortened, well, it cannot be just a release. There has to be some other side. And what about the other side? And if you look at the live CP child, or the live child with the cerebral palsy, what do you observe? You observe plenty of weaknesses, plenty. It's all weaknesses, hundreds, thousands of weaknesses. It would be dozens of spastic spots, but thousands of weaknesses. And then, you know, as the person who started in cybernetics, I asked a simple question. You know, how come that the textbook, the college textbook on engineering, if you give it to a third grader, he wouldn't, or a 10th grader even, he wouldn't understand the word there, but you give them a textbook on kinesiology, it's simple. Bend, extend, short, long, nice. For me, that doesn't make sense. You know, if the textbook on bridges is more complex than a textbook on humans, it's not because humans are simpler than bridges, it's because there is something wrong with the textbook. So that's a very simple logic. And then, you know, like from there, once you get to this, you try to understand how it works. And then you try to speak to engineers. But engineers, you have to understand engineering mindset. Engineering imports bits and pieces of physics, mathematics, and so on, but everything that could be counted, measured and counted. If it cannot be measured and counted, it's not the spectrum of engineering. So that's why you don't have any good reference there. You have this strange model with the super unstable, you know, bony skeleton, which is then kind of has the muscular attachments and so on. And that's a huge frustration, huge frustration. You know, you understand there is something fundamentally wrong with this model, but you don't know what to apply to. And, you know, like at those days, I did all sorts of weird things. You know, let's say I started textbooks on topology. I kind of went more into calculus and so on, but I kind of got some understanding, but I couldn't communicate it to anybody because, you know, like, let's put it like this. I'll be very honest with you. I consider myself a very mediocre in terms of the body reading or whatever as the sensory sort of body worker, right? Manual therapist. My hands-on ductility is maybe not, you know, it's not that sophisticated compared to a lot of people that I met. If I consider myself from the mathematical point, I'm very mediocre there as well. You know, let's say I met people who would be like 10 times smarter than me. But it just happened that I can understand both. So what do? I do bridges. I can get some obscure sciences and I can sort of understand, I know, peridynamics, contact mechanics, you know, like continuum, like molecular dynamics, all sorts of these things. I can understand what they're about and sort of re-engineer them and bring them into the practical field. So that's basically what I do. I kind of find things and do them that way. So, and that's kind of the quest for this understanding. So when I met Steve and with Danielle in Amsterdam, that was wow. Like I never heard about Buckminster Fuller to my, you know, to my whatever demise or to my kind of said, how could I, because I heard about Fullerens, I heard about like whatever, but I mean, you just pass by, I saw this, you know, whatever the Montreal thing and say, okay, that's some funny thing and so on. And then when it's been kind of shifted like that, I was like, wow, this thing has fundamental installed principle of, you know, let's say it has the chirality, it has dimensionality, it has the distribution, it has the oscillations, it has all these things at once. And, you know, like it has the all even like deeper branching roots. And because if you start reading Fuller himself, you know, he was actually just, he was talking about the energy geometry, right? Trying to bring the energy and geometry under the same roof. So he had the aspirants kind of post Einstein levels. So, but then that was it for me. And when, Mariana came, so she was probably one of the most enthusiastic people who ever worked with me in all these things. And, she was like, but you see, she's the one who is.
We fought a little bit.
Oh, come on. It wasn't a fight.
We had our fights, because I want to share this. It took me a while, and I keep telling this to the parents and the therapists that are in contact with me. I said, I wanted to learn to begin with, because I was frustrated. When I met Leonid, I was already 12 years working with these kids as a physical therapist. And I knew already I had kids that they would come to my office every day, and I would do my thing, my stretching, my NDT, and all that. And, they grew, and we never went anywhere. So I feel like me finding, okay, there's something way different of what they're doing. Let me see what that is. I was willing to learn, but it took me easily 2 years to shift that way of thinking. And that's why whoever is listening to this, and if you're new to biotensegrity, do your work and learn, but give yourself time to integrate this, because it's not an easy concept. Okay, Leonid, I want to invite now Brad, so we can,
yes.
have a conversation.
So Brad, we had many conversations with him as well, right? So
yes,
that was
because I had again, I when I learned about his work in the last tea party, I think I watched that video I don't know, maybe 10 times. And then
you never gave me that much,
Oh no, come on, Leon.
More than that.
2,000 hours. Oh my goodness. Okay, but so I'm gonna just put here I have my notes here. You were talking about, you said this. You said you shouldn't have to do detailed, specific repetition exercises if your tensional system is normal.
Mm-hmm.
If you have to, then you're dealing with a loss of the optimal tensional balance of the tensegrity. Okay, and when you said that, I thought about, okay, this is how we explain spasticity, because they are using their muscle tone to compensate that massive loss in the tensional system. So I want to know your approach, Brad. I know you mentioned at one point that you have worked in a spasticity clinic. I'm not sure if you did your prolotherapy in towards spasticity, thinking from the biotensegrity lens. So I'm curious to know your experience there.
I did apply some while I was working there, and one of my goals when I left the spasticity clinic, which was actually 2012, so it's been a while, was to eventually get back there. With a better understanding of biotensegrity, right? And being able to apply it. Now, in my office, I deal with musculoskeletal pain. So I see people with spasticity, either from, adults with cerebral palsy, people with spinal cord injuries, traumatic brain injuries that have spasticity. And then I work to find, again, where the structure has been compromised, the tensegrity, the continuity of tension is compromised. And like in some of those videos I showed, apply some pre-stress through my own hand, and then see how the body responds. And so that's the most fascinating aha things that happen. So I'll give you an example, and I wish I had some pictures to show you, but the gluteus maximus has always been a muscle that's perplexed me, right? Because we always learn origins and insertions of muscles. And it was never clear to me where gluteus maximus inserts, right? What bone does it insert into? And it really doesn't. And it really doesn't even originate from a bone. It's really just one big fascial tensioning muscle, which is really what all muscles are, right? But it's just the biggest example. So as it's coming down towards the lower extremity, they say it inserts into the femur at the gluteal tuberosity, something like that, right? But it's actually just the lower fibers are blending into the lateral intermuscular septum of the thigh and going down to the bone to separate your quadriceps from your hamstrings in the proximal thigh. But 80% of the glute max goes into, and basically it tensions the iliotibial band. So you've got this huge muscle that crosses the sacroiliac joint, the hip joint, interacts with the thigh muscles in strange ways, and then inserts down at the tibia through the what Gertie's tubercle on the tibia. It's like, what is going on with this muscle? So one of the most common places I do regenerative injection is along where the lowest part of the glute max inserts into the lateral intermuscular septum. So proximal thigh, basically just below the crease of the buttocks along the side of the thigh, right? So that's an area where people who are runners, they're tender there. People, athletes of any sort, if it's lower extremity, they end up being tender there. And if they've learned anything about rolling out trigger points, they've learned to roll out their iliotibial band because it's too tight, right? So they lay on a foam roller and they roll out their iliotibial band. What they're actually doing is they're rolling out trigger points in the vastus lateralis and intermedius that are deep to the iliotibial band. And the reason those are getting active is because the fascia above that is breaking down. So if you apply pressure in the right spot gently and retest some muscles, often they go from very weak to perfectly normal, turning on instantaneously. So you apply that to kids with cerebral palsy, spastic diplegia, right? So, and they're slowly internally rotating their femurs as they try to walk, as they're going through walking, right? And they get more and more crouched and more valgus and internally rotated. And you can try to test their hip extension or their hip external rotation strength in prone, and they're so weak. You apply a little pressure in that spot and retest them, they'll almost always be stronger, just with a little pressure at that location. So that was the first place where I'm like, I really would love to do a study where we at least look at the fascial structure under ultrasound, for instance, in this population.
That would be amazing. Because I don't know, Leonid, have you ever done anything with ultrasound to see?
Yeah, we did actually last year.
Nice.
We did, like, what is it, the elastography? Yeah, there was a small group in Holland, like they were actually doing it in 3 or 4 places, and one of them in particular was plantar fascia and so on. So that is, that was actually, but like they were supposed to bring it in, but with this whole coronavirus thing, like that group, I think, sort of semi-collapsed, but probably will resurrect at some point.
So I like integrating what's so great about the ultrasound is you can integrate what you see in the patient's history, what you feel on exam, and then integrate it with visual feedback, right? So about the tension, I like to look at the tissues with the intrinsic pre-stress that's in the system by palpating with the probe, right? Palpate, watching how the tissues deform in response to that. Because again, muscles are just fascial tensioning agents, right? They're not movers. They just tension the fascia and allow the fascia to then move you, because that's where the energy is stored, is in this pre-stress of the collagen fibers, right? So, so finding these weaknesses, so many times there are weaknesses in a muscle, which I call kind of micro tears on ultrasound, and you get an MRI and it's like, well, that's completely normal muscle. There's no tears there. And you look at it under ultrasound with the dynamics and you go, well, there's a tear right there. I mean, it's totally weak in that spot. It just collapses when you push on it. You go to this part of the muscle and it has this bounce back to it, like a normal tensional integrity system. And you shift over here and it's just, boom, it just falls down. You apply a little pressure there and retest a whole system, and everything turns on.
Yeah.
So it's fascinating to me, and I have so many questions about what you guys do. I'm finding more and more in terms of musculoskeletal pain, can be chronic, severe low back pain, multiple surgeries, and they've had some sort of abdominal wall injury in the past. And often it has to do with abdominal wall feeding into the arcuate ligament of the diaphragm around L1 and the 12th rib, right in that transition area. And it's like, that is such a key spot where you initiate movement from. And so many times now, since I've been finding these little diaphragm injuries in that area, that people can't, they don't realize that they've had shortness of breath issues since their, water skiing accident 15 years ago. But then you ask them, well, when you're in pain, is it hard to get a deep breath? Well, yeah. And it's like, well, do you find that, have you noticed that off and on? It's like, yeah, but it's just because I'm anxious. And it's like, but then you treat the area and they come back and they're like, I'm not having that anymore. So there's something about initiating movement from the diaphragm that I would love to hear more conversation about from you guys' perspective, from manual therapist perspective. The dorsal hinge, someone just wrote, I saw on a, right? So it's, but there are, I don't know how to write this up, but there are small injuries in that location, say at L1 transverse process, where the arcuate ligament from the diaphragm comes down. And you've got lumbocostal ligament, that's a really strong ligament there going to the 12th rib. And all of this is coming together, and the quadratus lumborum comes all the way up there, and the diaphragm's attaching. You got all these forces from all these different directions coming together right there. And if you get an injury there, it can be like not a big deal, but then this whole system won't work with each movement. And so over time, you develop chronic pain from this one small injury. So and so then when you talk about spasticity, well, I could go on and on, right? But
no, it's okay. Something that for me, I learned 2001. I was certified in NDT. That's an approach for cerebral palsy in physiotherapy, right? And the number one rule that we had is, if the child is showing you tone, you have to stabilize the torso. Like when you are facilitating the movement in therapy, you would have to come and stabilize the torso, because that would make them lose their tone and, be a little more functional. So, but I mean, that's good with your hands, but how you get that in reality, especially when you have kids like severely compromised with spastic quadriplegic, that they cannot follow your commands to strengthen, like voluntarily, the torso, you know what I mean? So this is, maybe Leonid, you could talk a little bit about your maybe the paradoxical respiratory performance.
But shall I do the mini share with some pictures, right? So you see, we get people to get some ideas of what we're talking about, right? So I'll try to do this share screen thing, and let me do that. And what is this? This is slideshow. Wait, no, that's the wrong one. Yeah, let me do this slideshow from current slide palette. So you see, that's basically one of my older presentations here, just for you to visualize the things, right? Is that, like, to get back to this conversation that we had today. Well, the Yates quote, whatever the decentering part. So this one of the first things that actually bugged me in the whole system, right? Is that if you look at the total bulk of the physical therapy, the total bulk is about the periphery. It's about, because where it's basically changing the spastic muscles, basically the whole ranking goes from wherever it is the most spastic, that's where we go. And, since we can only address whatever 5-10 at a time, so the remaining 500, so they are basically out of the map. So that was my first point. My first point is that, well, if we look at the system and I see those kids, I mean, I don't have any prejudice. I just kind of look at them at face value. And I look at this child, and this child literally sinks. And then my question is that, how on earth this weakness is unaccounted in our interpretation of the case? Like, how could you possibly do that? And then you compare it to a healthy child and try to squeeze the healthy child. It doesn't, it basically gives you that uniform tension response. So in fact, if I speak about the tensegrity, that's the first thing that really like clicked on me in terms of the hands-on experience, because when you do there, apply the loads, namely apply the compression to the humans, right? So what happens? We convert the external compression into the internal tension. And if what you experience, again, with their tensegrity towers or any other models, is this actual gradient that first it gives in easily, but then the more it compacts, the more it holds on. And that's, I'm using this concentration and decentration as, Van der Waals' favorite quotes from Blechschmidt's about the impingement and expansion. But this is the thing that, with a healthy person, you get that the more load is applied, the more tensioning spreads and the more it spreads and kind of gets distributed, and the stronger it holds. And that's the experience that is so normal and so usual for us. But you apply it, you try to get the same to the CP child, they collapse. And that's my central point. Why the total, if we look at the equation of the conversations that exist in the total like bodywork therapy, training, and so on space, it would be these giant chunks of the conversations talking about the releases and very, very small like part of the conversations talking about the weaknesses. Although, as we've just heard from Brad, so he comes from a completely different perspective, but note his point that he gets into the details specific of a kind of mid-sized level, right? So you see, because that's what the key point is. The same way as we are looking at this change of scale. In my approach to the CP, I'm actually applying a more pedantic and kind of boring lens. I don't want to look at the big scales. I look at those intercostals, external, internal, like, those 12 ribs on each side, right? So 24, but each of them has, has the connections. If you start multiplying those 24 by 3, that becomes already 72, right? And then the rib angles, the nipple lines, then it becomes, like 72 by 4. It's another, so you got 300 points already. So, and what is we have in common in conversation with Brad, that's exactly this scale. He talks about the septa. He talks about the transition. He talks about the small points, but it's not about the idea the small point fixes the large ones, right? It's the idea that when you go into this like small centimeter scales, you discover that at those small centimeter scales and people who have the like large superficial tensions in the wrong way, right? So you see fusions or whatever way you put them. So you have, if you zoom in the centimeters, you find lots of weaknesses. And his point was very simple. If you just even probe and do a micro stimulation, that already changes the test. But of course, the question is how to make this on the systematic level, on a larger scope at once, kind of how to make it sustainable and so on and so forth. So, but this is the first kind of thing. And then look at that, because people sometimes ask me, well, maybe that's acquired property. It was actually like 10 years ago and so, but I was lucky, to get a kid who was 4 weeks premature. And I saw him like he was 6 weeks. He wasn't a great kid in terms of the tissue quality, but that regular kid, he was showing some poor reflexes and so on. But you look at this kid, you try to squeeze him, he gives you this uniform response. And you know that this kid is going to be fine. And well, he went fine. But the fact is that he is, you see, I'm showing here, I'm trying to compress him from the top. I'm exposing his entire weight onto his chest, right? So you see, that's the annotation here, right? I'm exposing his entire weight here. It doesn't buckle, it doesn't fall. So that's the presence of the center. That's And the only way that we can reasonably interpret, because in technical terms, that would be the bulk modulus, right? And that's basically where we are. So my question has always been, if we are asking things about the lines, muscles, or shortnesses, whatever, the lines, elastic modulus, right? That's line modulus. Look at the textbooks. Line modulus is a subset of a shear modulus, which is a surface, and the slab, right? And that is a subset of the bulk modulus. So the bulk modulus, and then yet in our discourse, in our conversation about the bodies, those things don't exist. But then you might ask me a question, say, hey, Mr. Blyum, like these are extremes. These are, like which the conversation, say, with Tom Findlay. He always dismisses these things. Like this is a brain injury. So nothing really counts. For me, the way that I look at it is a completely different thing. If you look at this perspective, these are if you look at it from a big scale, what is this? This is the situation when these are the children who never survived. So you see, if you take 5,000 generations of the modern human, 4,997, these kids didn't survive. But now they do. So we finally, and they make like 0.5% of the human population. What is the lesson for me? That these children, they show us, maybe they're half of the population, 0.5% of the population, but they show us 99% of our morphological diversity as species. So they are our insight, not the rabbits, not the pigs, not whatever. They are the ones which are showing like who we are and how we can shift what kind of spectrum we belong to. So, and we are in this unique situation when we can learn from that. The society evolved, to the level that these children not only survive, but they can like live for years, and they, the families around them and so on. So this is such an immense opportunity and such, like a massive insight. And what are we doing to these kids? We are applying medieval butchering things. I mean, for me, this is such a waste of opportunity, such a, like dumb approach in that respect. So
I have a question.
Yes, please.
How do you change this low tension? What do you do?
Well, you see, I have fully mathematized it recently. So, in that sense, but the logic actually is very simple. I don't know, like if I'm going to find it somewhere, but I will do it. I'll probably try to do it. Let me stop sharing.
Stop sharing that. Depending on what you're looking, I'm going to just add one thing. I have my model here, right?
Yes, please.
Because one of the things that for me was super clear in my touch with the kids, it's like they were always slippery to my hands. The kids, like especially when they were little, like you will take them and they will just kind of slide off my hands, especially, and other pathologies as well. And then at one point, I was still fighting to get this in my head and to understand this. And then one day Leonid comes and he talks about the attachments. He was very specific about how the tissues are connected to the periosteum and how firm those attachments are. And in the assessment, we were testing, like you go, let's say for the hamstrings, you follow that point where you will feel the insertion, if you can call them like that, and you can just drag that along everything. So, in a way, and then at one point, Leonid told me, we are lucky that we get to experience this huge or massive collapse, because you don't see that in when the tensional system is kind of okay. You don't get to appreciate, and we take for granted that the joints are moving at the joints. These kids, they don't. They fold in other places. they have movements that we cannot describe anatomically because they don't move in places that we expect them to move. So in that sense, like I feel like we are in a way in a very good position to understand what happens when you don't have the tension. What happens when they are just collapse? And well, are you finding some before and after, Leonid? I do have some here, but that will be good.
You know, you can probably I can have some.
Yeah, but basically, and this is for me why this conversation was so interesting, because what he is doing and I'm doing with the technique, we're passively delivering some mechanical and we're moving the fluid, so we are activating the fibroblasts as well, passively. Okay, and there are some mechanisms that are, you know, explained out there that why when you're pushing the fluids, that flow activate the fibroblasts and realign the collagen network, right? So that's why I was so curious when you said that in you injected the area with your sugary substance or sugary solution, and then you waited 3 months to see the full development of the matrix. In our case, what we're doing, we're teaching the parents to mechanically do that on a regular basis. Okay, but you see, like the child, hopefully you'll find some pictures, Leonid, right?
Yeah, I can find pictures, but you know, look, let me, you know, you see, I must say that I told you that I have seriously remathematized things in the weeks, right?
I don't know if I'm ready for this.
yeah, come on, you know. But look, it's simple. It's actually simple. So first of all, let me maybe show, but I mean, obviously I have more. I mean, I must say that unfortunately, this computer croaked 3 days ago, and I actually got it from the repairs just 1 hour before we started. So my preparation is probably not at its best.
Can I attempt to paraphrase or say something and see if I'm hearing you accurately? So you're applying a compressive load through your hand in strategic ways that induce tension inside the body, which
let me
finish, and then you can say, yeah, this part makes sense. So you apply compression, you get tension in areas where there's low tension, and that helps activate fibroblasts that then will build the tension into the system that lasts.
Correct.
Yes.
In short, that's correct. Like as I said, and now I have a more accurate forms of describing it, but that's really the logic, right? Is that, you know, we kind of come back from a very simple thing. You know, we ask a question: who is a universal agent of repairs? That's the fibroblast. Now, if we ask ourselves the fibroblast equation, well, science tells us that, you know, fibroblast is doing well in terms of equation solving. It has all 4 parts, right? It can form the new connections, and, you know, with the gels, let's say, you know, liquid to the fractions of fascia, it can, like with the GAGs, right? So you see, it can chop the GAGs, it can create fibers, and it can chop the fibers. So basically, it has the full capacity to do with the liquid and fibrous sort of components of the fascia build. The fibroblast has the full capacity. But what it was last year that I've kind of got this from some Chinese article. They actually called it the dormant fibroblast and the motivated fibroblast, right? And the question is how to convert. So the same fibroblast could be dormant, you know, because they were studying the wound healing. And maybe it's a problem of translation from Chinese, right? So is he calling it motivated fibroblast, you know, but I really grabbed this term, and I think that this is really perfect, because the fibroblast, which is excluded from a certain like tensional network, it's dormant. So it has this capacity, but it's not motivated. So what is our job? Our job is to create such a local tensional environment that we would change the phase and make it get from the dormant to the motivated state. But last year, I also got finally, you know, it's been my long-term sort of trouble to get my teeth through it. And it's the discipline which is called peridynamics. So it's it's a more advanced formulation of the elasticity theory, originated by Stuart Stilling, who is works for Sandia National Government or National Laboratories at New Mexico. So, and it's been a growing approach. So basically, it's about the non-local, transition to the non-local elasticity. And he has over there, they have a really beautiful concept of the metastability. So what happens with the strain energy? Like the best example is the simplest example is to understand is the freezing of the water into ice, right? So don't remember the Fahrenheit thing, but let's speak Celsius. So normally the transition between ice and water is 0 degrees. That's the whole idea of 0 degrees in Celsius. So, but if depending on how the water is being cooled, it could go down to say -4 and it would still be liquid. So that's a type of the metastable situation when the energy minimum is already different, but the kind of group relationship in the system are still going in such a way that at this meso scale or the meta scale, the situation is still stable, and it needs just a little push, to convert the water into the ice. You just need some micro nodes of crystallization, and then it clicks and it starts looking for this energy minimum. So the same thing works with the strain energy fields. So if you would imagine the description of your the gluteus maximus, right? So what you're going to imply there, that from the peridynamic standpoint, if, for example, you look at the area of, let's say, 10 square inches, right? So within the 10 square inches, you can have 5 square inches of very weak tissue and 5 square inches of the tissue which is kind of below the strain normal, like the strain average, and you would have the 5 square inches of tissue which would be above. That would be the painful ones and so on. But the thing is that they are in that metastable state, so over the area of 10 square inches, they balance each other out and deliver this sort of average density. So, which is not very stable on the one hand, it's more fragile than the healthy 10 square inches. But what happens, since the system is willing to find its own next sort of energy optimization state, when you bring yourself in with some stimulus to the weak one, so basically you are then shifting, you are basically kind of causing the changes, this metastable situation. And in fact, even what is called the myofascial release, it's, if we look at the practical implementation, nobody is applying forces which are even remotely close to the ones necessary to, really break tight collagen bonds and so on. And that's my chapter in the book of John Trivarta on biotensegrity and scars. My chapter is called The Unreasonable Effectiveness of Light Touch. But this is really the key. We have those pockets of sciences which have perfect explanations. So, the peridynamics, again, the problem with peridynamics is behind this barrier of fancy mathematics. It's not an easy read by any means, But once you kind of understand it, you've got everything there. So the idea of how you can, so whether it's the 5/10 inches, 5 compensating exaggerated, elevated inches, square inches, they could be motivated to bring the average down. So, but on the other hand, it's the weaker ones that could also be, we should also be motivated to get this flip. And then this metastable thing with the big gap between the kind of high strain and low strain, once you add like this kind of tipping point energy into the system, it would rearrange closer to what is called the Maxwell line, right? Maxwell after James Clerk Maxwell, because he's the one who kind of originally got this for electricity. So then the system would reset closer. So the high strain would become lower strain, like lower down, and the lower strain would get up. So that's basically how it works if you look at it from the sort of proper perspective. But then
can you explain, Leonid, so we can round this a little bit? What's the, like, in practical terms, how you deliver this? Like, what you do? Because he is doing sugary, sorry, I don't know exactly the word for that.
And platelets, yeah.
Yes, so
okay.
yeah, what's the mechanism that we are using then to change that? Okay.
Okay, then it's
I
easy.
understand what you're saying right now.
Okay.
Did I
share the screen or not? I didn't share the
No,
screen.
you haven't. You haven't.
Yeah, okay, let me do that. Where am I? Share the screen. Share the screen. Bang. From current slide. Right, so you see, this is just some examples. I'm just, as I said, I didn't get myself too prepared. You know, I just pulled some old stuff. So, you know, my logic here is just to demonstrate that this is possible, right? So that change of tensioning, change of the total index, or the total aerodynamic index in that sense, is very much possible. So these are just kind of few examples of the kids who changed via those applications. So, but then the logic, the answer is here. The answer is here. So this is the graph which was nicely redrawn for me by Graham from the like standard text of James Wang and the mechanobiology of the tendon. So my point is very simple. At the end of the day, no matter which school we belong, no matter who we are or whatever, you know, I'll try to stretch it even more. So no matter who we are, we have to accept one simple fact. Our impact channels down to simple things. Stress, strain. External stress converts into the internal strain. But then, in that respect, what do we have? We have 4 phases within the stress-strain curve, which is here corresponds to the percentages of that strain on the, on the collagen fibers bundled within the tendon. But the logic is this. You've got the phase 4, that's macro failure. And what surgery is doing? Surgery is introducing macro failure into the system, and then like a super mega strain, cutting is a super mega strain, and then stitching it together, right? The old idea of the release is the idea of introducing the micro failure into the system and kind of try to deal with inflammation as the information. But the most interesting part is in the beginning. So the key point is to understand that we are dealing with crimped fibers, right? So all the fibers that we have are crimped. Namely, they are wavy. What's the problem with waviness? Waviness is wild randomness. The relationship between tension and length on which the fibroblasts feed within crimp is unpredictable. But it's a good thing, meaning that everything that belongs to the crimp, that's kind of can be handled by the smart matter, so that you don't need to, like, it's basically good enough to work. So the thing is that you ask yourself a question, where do we have a controllable tension length integral, right? Again, we have to think in integrals. It's not length, it's not tension, it's the tension length. And within the tension length, it's the tension that controls the increment and that controls the information. So once you understand this, it's simple. All you need to do, once you find crimped fibers, and what are the weak fibers? What are the weak situations? That's excess crimp. That's excess waviness. That's the poorest relationship between the tension and length. That's the kind of the most lost integral. So what do you need to do? Whether geometrically or whether, let's say, or by direct tissue impacts, you have to impose the restraint on that. So that's why, I've been practicing with dozens of all sorts of materials, like, look, if we look even at this ball, right? So what is the huge advantage of the ball? Which say, like when I explained it to John Sharkey in 2013 and the version which I had back then as the guided stress transfer name. So it was a very simple point. This thing has predictable range. This, if the crimps within that disconnected body, they are all confused and they are all messed up. So it's unpredictable relationship. If I impose on top of this the distributed tension system, which has better control, namely a transition from phase 1 of this on the stress strain curve, the crimp, to the phase 2, which is a quasi-linear phase, I'm in the field of motivating fibroblasts. We can do it via the geometric organization, going elliptic. We can do it with the foam rollers. We can do it with the weighted balls. We can do it with all sorts of rubbers, foams, textiles, any kind of interfaces that have a predictable crimp within it. And that was a really great quote which I got a couple of years ago from Heike Jäger. She was she's a treasure, absolute treasure, and the machine gun effects at the same time. And she had this statement: a fibroblast only knows the tension of their, it doesn't know where it belongs to. It perceives the world through tension. So that means that if you have been able to deliver that tension and kind of mediate your stress-strain relationship by external viscoelastic item, you're good. But on the other hand, even if you don't use the viscoelastic item, if you are as a, like I share with everybody that 4-minute clip from Jan Trevarta talking about the scars and the body and the tissues going home. The way that she's describing the behavior of the scars under the hand is absolute masterpiece. So that was number 6 or number 9, I don't remember. It was 24th minute, I think there. 4 minutes, sheer brilliance. Like you get this description and it goes precisely. She uses the word, let's say, I feel the tug releasing under my hand. But lately, and I must say that I've been kind of knocking on my head, like for being so dumb. So, because if you look at and I actually even sent this message to Niall. So in his university, Emory University, some people from biomechanics lab, they started to talk about the next derivatives of force. So because we are usually dealing with the derivative of force, which is, force, mass by acceleration, but there are next levels. Young is equivalent, is the next, like the same way as the acceleration is a derivative of velocity, right? So you see that's, that's going, it's a second derivative of time. So then you've got the jerk, which is a third derivative of time. So the equivalent of force for the third derivative of time would be yang. The equivalent of force for the fourth derivative of time would be the tug. So, and these are really amazing things how the mathematics of this calculus kind of starts playing, because if you put all this together to the stress strain curve, your goal is super simple. You just have to bring it back. But on the one hand, if we are doing it mechanically through the external viscoelastic items, with the prolotherapy, you are introducing a certain surge in the local area tension, but that surge in local area tension also takes care of the excess crimp in the area. So, but again, even the fact that it's short-lived, you see, that's what I'm saying. We have to deal not with the absolutes, we have to deal with the gradients. So, and if we deal with the gradients, that means that we have to deal with the derivatives, the rate of change in time. And I'm very sure, Brad, that when you are doing it, experientially, you understood that it's not about only your solution, it's about the rate at which you are injecting, and you also have to develop the skill. And I'm sure that when you teach people, you get that some people doing the same thing, and some people are getting the great results because they're feeling how that injection of the solution kind of comes into the tissue, and some people are just doing it mechanically and they're nowhere near in the efficiency of the best performance. Would you agree with me on that?
Yeah, yes. It's so funny because there's a part of the world that does regenerative injection from a more traditional biomechanical orthopedic surgery mindset, and they're jumping in and treating spots based on traditional diagnoses of, oh, this is a tendinopathy or a bursitis. And then if they're really open-minded, then they start thinking about loosening tissue, hydrodissection, hydrorelease, where there's tight fascia. And it's hard to get people who are into those two worlds to think about regenerative treatments that are trying to restore tension, trying to restore pre-stress. It's just really hard to get them to think about it.
But
they understand.
Maria, let me maybe, shall I get my favorite example of the bicycle wheel? Because really, I believe this is the most important thing. Like it's maybe, let me say two words, right? Is that currently,
and after this, we have to come to an end at one point. Okay?
Currently, I'm busy with editing the translation of Graham's book into Russian.
Oh, excellent.
And when you actually, I might throw this point at Susan and Mariana and so on, that maybe at some point we should also do a party which would be like really dedicated to this, the new meanings which come from trying to translate Biotensegrity in the other languages. I'm pretty sure that would be like a lot of questions which arise when you try to convert it into Spanish, Russian, German, whatever. Like some languages really go well, some languages don't go well, and so on. It just like it's really clicks. And I'm looking at this, one of the introductions from Steve, right? And here, for whatever reason, in Russian, it just sounded different. And I think that that's really the critical point, because when we're talking about the biotensegrity, we are discussing the fundamental, like a meat cleaver of reality. Which way do we see the reality? What kind of spatial framework which underpins the biology do we kind of go by? Whether it's this distributed, super stable one, and like oscillating and so on, uniform, integral, paradynamic, whatever, which is the biotensegrity, or do we stick to that, like taking the column and trying to add, some motors to it? And in that sense, I do think that kind of one, if there is one example that clearly sets it, it's the example of the bicycle wheel versus the cartwheel. I mean, I have it here nearby.
While you're getting that, I think Brad here is, once you understand biotensegrity, that's the only way of dealing with this.
Mhm.
Because if you see that tightness or compensation is coming because something else is not holding it, and that's why I love so much the title of this conversation, when the center,
Yeah.
just because it's not holding, so something else has to come and take that job, because this is not holding. So we are not looking into, I'm going to release this. No, you have to look why it's tight to begin with.
Right.
And that's, for me, that's why understanding this is so important.
Let me do this, right? So you see, this is the bicycle wheel. You know, the bicycle
put it
wheel
in presentation mode if you can.
I put it in the okay. Yeah, I will do this. Just a second. Oops. Here we are. So that's the cart wheel versus the bicycle wheel. And you know, somewhere I have this quote from Fuller. You know, let's say the way that he initiated, right? So it's, I hope that you're all familiar with this debate. Because there are hundreds of pages written in the bicycle wheel debate. So where does it support from? Does it support from the bottom or does it support from the top? But this debate sort of moves us away from the most interesting thing. You see, when we are looking at that, you see, these are the graphs which are showing you the response of the bicycle wheel. What does it mean? That means this is the tensional system, pure tensional system. Now, it has the weight. You put the tensional system into which has the weight, you put it into the reality where it deals with the reaction forces. It has the weight, so once it meets the ground, then it experiences what? Compression. Tension, compression. And I want to say one basic thing. Tension and compression are opposed. That means that they don't add, they subtract. So if the system is tensional, then compression has to be subtracted. If the system is compressional, then the things have to be added. So, which brings us to the central question, the bum, the pelvis. Does it support your upper body or does it sink into your upper body? Do your legs support you or whether it's your upper body supports it? That's a really critical question. And that's a very practical question that you cannot escape. Because you see, these are the clear graphs. Once you introduce the compression into the tensional system, they subtract. And this is the experience that we see with the CP children. The legs do not support them. They buckle. And if anything, that's really, for me, the critical and simplest understanding. So that's why people tend to say, well, you know, like, let's reconcile biomechanics with biotensegrity. No, you cannot. Because then you either have the fundamentally compressional system with additional tensional components, but then the compressions add, or you have a tensional system with additional compressional inserts to scale up your tensional index. But when it comes, that's on the inside. But at the interface with the external forces, then compression gets subtracted. So added and subtracted are not reconcilable. You either have to be here or there. And once it's not reconcilable, then you have to ask yourself a question. Damn, how come that with this subtraction, every time I step on the ground, this thing subtracts? But amazingly, it doesn't feel so. So that means that you have to understand there are at least 2 levels of the super stability. It's not a simple relationship. It's at least a 3-level complex relationship. First, it tries to sink, that something meets it, cancels it, then kind of springs back and gives you the impression that the ground supports you. So it's a 3 levels, not 1. So, and that's really the tricky part. And that's, again, tensional systems could be layered infinitely. Compressional systems, they flatten, they converge everything into one single thing. So that's tangible. But once you go to the world of tensional systems with the compression inserts, which subtract external compression, then your total interaction with the body changes. And then what we see, and that's my central point, body workers, movement therapists, and so on, in terms of the experiential sensitivity, you know, like that guidance by the sensation, they do the right thing. You see, if you look at the last 100 years, from brutal, you know, realignment techniques, everything mellowed, everything extended, everything became much slower, and so on and so forth. And you're all being trained on being like listening to the body and so on. It's just kind of, the lingua is like woofy for me, right? But the thing is, that's really what it is. So when you are being asked to get the proper touch on the body as an osteopath or structural integrator even, what you're looking at, you are introducing the compression that you don't want to have subtracted. So you have to meet it in such a way that you would be blending your external compression interface, that they would become tensionally uniform, that they would have the same strain energy index, so they would become a uniform peridynamic horizon. You know, like the last 10 years have been in the background, there's been amazing scientific things, but they are just kind of being hidden in all sorts of this pocket. But for me, this is really the central question. And the children with cerebral palsy, they are the ones who give you this answer. When you look at this child, you realize that these children, they are not being supported from the ground. They don't have this 3 levels. They experience the compression, and this compression gets subtracted. Yeah. So that's, I will rest my case on this and get back to the normal mode.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to explore here, and there are Leonid, and now I have my own hundreds of pictures of, you have a child who's completely compressed and weak, and after a year you can see it looks like they're been blown up from inside, so they look like much stronger, right?
It's formulaic, right? It's not experiential, it's formulaic, it's simple.
Okay. Well, we do have questions, and I'm gonna ask, well, first, everyone can turn on your camera now, and so this is a tea party.
Wait. Shall I tell one more embarrassing story about you, right? You know,
about me? Why? Like, I'm doing good now. Come on.
You see, you know, speaking about clashes, right? So you see, Mariana is forever in my language, right? So you see, when she came, she first said, Mr. Blyum, me and math, we don't go together. So since 13 years old, I wanted to become a therapist, and math doesn't come into my repertoire. I said, Marie, that's fantastic. But as a physical therapy, have you ever measured the range of motion? She said, yes. I said, well, congratulations. You are a mathematician. So, and that means that if you are a mathematician, if you are using it, like, whether you measure or whether you feel or whether you evaluate, you know, whether when you say the word muscle, when you say the word fascia, when you say the distance and so on, you become a mathematician. And I must say that I'm very impressed by the way how you have emerged and evolved as the kind of hidden crypto mathematician, right? So, and that would.
Listen, I was here last week and you were not here and we were talking about math, okay? So I'm getting there, I'm getting there. Okay, I know Carol has a question, Carol Davis. I'm gonna unmute you. If I can, I cannot, yes, there you are, Carol.
Well, I don't, it's not really a question. It's trying, you know, as Leonid talks, what I try to do is take his experience that he has in his mind, listen to his words, get a picture in my mind as to what I'm doing. The most that I have brought to it, Leonid, is that when I am doing my hands-on therapy, kind of like Brad does, what we do is look for where it is that there's too much of something or too little of something, but mostly too much of something. And through compression and elongation, wait, and just wait. And then feel with our interoceptors and our proprioceptors, how is this changing? And what's happening? I wait for it and feel it, not just with my hands, but deep inside, what's happening. And then after a while, and a long while, usually 5 minutes at least, something shifts. And then this experience of, it's, as Jan Terwatha says, the fascia is coming back home now. And I had this great talk with Kelly Clancy about how her approach, and she can tell you directly, is to take the hands off and wait for that to come. I leave my hands on and wait for that to come, but I always tell my patients, this will keep on going tonight when you go home. You may want to keep on winding. You may feel changes. You'll feel changes maybe tomorrow. This doesn't just happen when our hands are on you. It's happening energetically through the whole system.
So you see, that's what I said, guys. It's formulaic. Step one, you know, what you're doing, you are trying to get compression to tensional system, right? So you don't want subtraction. That's all the words of all the schools. They are all kind of, and that subtraction starts even before you touch, right? Because basically it's like, it's the how tense the person or how relaxed the person and so on. So you don't want subtraction and you don't want the bounce back. So that's the first point. The second thing, you're beautifully, I mean, I heard you so many times and you always find the new words for these descriptions, right? And you're very poetic in that sense. So that inner and so on. But that is basically what you're describing. You are describing the transition of a metastable state, which actually seeks the next gradient of the strain energy for what is beautifully called peridynamic horizon, right? Peridynamic horizon is the system which is characterized not by structure, but the uniform strain field. So you and the person, you are being two separate peridynamic families. During the therapy session, you get this interface, connect yourself and the person into a single peridynamic horizon. So for a moment, so for the single peridynamic horizon, which causes the redistribution of the metastable states, which then creates a certain cluster of motivated fibroblasts, and voila, then you separate, but that peridynamic family, which was the person, that peridynamic family now has its own metastable transitions. They're seeking their own, you know, basically they're seeking their next strain energy minimum. And if you want the famous unwinding, right? So you see it can come with the additional vibrations and the releases, because in that sense, there is an integration of the free energy, but then at the same time, it has to be dissipation, right? So you see whatever doesn't fit has to be dissipated by basic vibrational things. So, you know, what I'm just trying to say is saying, guys, you know, there are beautiful and high quality explanations, high quality like narratives, which really put it into a very productive way when we can kind of come to the same understanding and then convert the experiential things and the beautiful languages and all these images that everyone is having, so into this kind of more algorithmic form.
I want to add here, because I think we have to come at one point to closing this tea party. I think we have a lot more to share. Yes, you want to say something, Chris?
Yes, I do, Mariana. And that is because we've heard so much about the adding compression to create tension. And so many of the people here are body workers, we're movers. I know you well enough to know some of the work that you've been doing to give your parents the opportunity to help their children by creating that tension. And I know people would love to see some images and hear a little bit about what you're doing.
Well, Leonid is wearing his binder. You have it, right? Your
No.
support, or no? No, oh, you had it before. Like basically the concept here is to while they're working with whatever techniques they're taught to build this, you can still support what Brad is doing with his finger, right? To test that immediately that changes the whole tensional system and they can do more. That's what we're doing. We are, and in my case, I'm giving them everyday ideas that they can use, as simple as having a ball in between their belly and the wheelchair tray. Just by that, you're creating a little bit more tension that is holding them better. Leonid is using his binder with the ball inside. He's also using the wrappings. I'm using the neck support, for example. That's something, I don't know, Leonid, if you saw it, but I showed my parents how to build with a sock and batting, how to build a neck support. And they have that. And only that is creating like a whole cascade of improvements immediately, because we're giving some tension to the system. So I think that's what you're...
Maria, just to interrupt you in that sense. So you see, that was a good point from her about, for example, her neck support and so on. But the key thing here is what kind of interface you are having. So you see, because if you are just trying to do it in the rigid format or whatever, any aggressive format in that sense, you are still staying within the same, you're either being in the subtraction mode or in the crimp mode. The thing is to find that range of that phase two kind of tension length, like balance, which gives you that, you know, what basically all of you guys are experiencing on the hands-on. So we're trying to do some proxy for that, which would be using some viscoelastic tools.
Yes, yeah. So in that sense, it's always, you know, from the practical point of view, and again, as I'm saying here, I'm still wondering, we don't have time today to go through that, but I'm very curious about the different time frames that Brad is using with what Leonid and I were doing, because he was very specific, saying, you know, you get the treatment done, and then you wait, because you don't want to stress the tissue anymore. And when you are going back to your practice, you're going to go gradually, because you don't want to create more stress in that tissue to let it remodel, right? So I'm very curious to know, you know, what are the different mechanisms here that we're using, because obviously Leonid first, and I learned from that, and now I'm just doing the same with my kids. We are seeing the improvements. We're seeing like they get stronger, the tone goes down, they get things that I never saw, honestly. Like I was so used to train them, to teach them how to move, to teach, and this is something that I forgot to mention. Brad, you said it in your presentation last time when you were talking about the robot that is not brain associated, but it's right. Like, okay, that for me is what's happening with these kids. Okay, like there's nothing different happening in their brains, and now they're moving better. So it wasn't the brain controlling the movement; it was something else, right? So I think here we have so much to explore, and I'm fascinated how, in both cases, we are working towards where's the weakness, and once that integration is made, boom, something comes, right? So.
I have a question for kind of the general audience. If they have any feedback on applying this type of thinking to Ehlers-Danlos?
Rachel, I think. Where is Rachel? Yes, open.
I'm here. I'm here.
You hear the question?
I did. Yeah.
Yes. I would love to hear your feedback on that.
Well, I'm a movement specialist, but I have to say that when I first started listening to Mariana and following her work, I immediately thought this is absolutely applicable to people with Ehlers-Danlos. And I work mostly with adult clients and have applied it, her ideas about support and stuff to my adult Ehlers-Danlos clients with great results. So not necessarily movement series specifically in this sense, but encouraging them to use these support ideas when they're sitting to work, right? When they're sitting to read a book, whatever they might be doing, because to me the theory absolutely made sense and should be and is applicable to Ehlers-Danlos. That same idea of the pump up of the system, for lack of a better phrase right now, and keep everything moving and the fluids moving. I mean, all the theory applies really well to Ehlers-Danlos.
Have you found any written resources that have helped you or online training that have helped you apply it better, or you just applied what you've learned from Mariana and Leonid?
I haven't found anything specific, no, but to be honest with you, I also haven't looked very hard for it. So more in a practical application of what I gleaned and learned from Mariana, because I just, it just made sense to me that the theory should work. Yeah.
Kelly? Yes.
Yeah, my experience with Ehlers-Danlos is that they have to be treated very three-dimensionally, not, symptom approach, and that often they're attempting to create tension in their structure because they are not experiencing it within their tissue. So a lot of these people will create spirals in their system and end up, hypersubluxing or whatever, because there's so much abnormal tension that they're attempting to create in their system, and they hyper-rotate until their joints sublux. So they actually end up be the tightest people that I work with, which seems really paradoxical. So the way to treat them is to de-rotate their system and then three-dimensionally balance them, very much like Leonid was saying, that there has to be at least 3 points of pressure, but three-dimensionally to get them to be more stable.
What about you, Brad? Like what? Yeah, sorry.
I just wanted to say, right, is that you see, but I think that one of the important sort of notes that we have to keep in mind, right, is that, the thing that kind of came in the last few years in the biotensegrity conversation as well is the multi-scale. That we have to realize that when we speak, like, for example, what Kelly was just referring, right? So you see some of the tightest people. So, but they would be some of the tightest people if you look at them at the scale of the links, which go for like feet, for meters, right? So you see for tens of centimeters, but at the same time, if you look at these people from their scale of their centimeters, right, or whatever fractions of inches, you would see that it's all in a global distributed way, very, very, very loose. And that's actually, again, very straightforward. When the person loses their distributed volumetric bulk modulus, right? Bulk modulus, shear modulus, and then what happens? Then they have to go from the bulk modulus distribution towards their, elastic modulus distribution, which exactly what you are seeing there. So, I think that it's really like if we keep in mind the scales and always like keep the register at which scale we are keeping the conversation, that is very helpful.
What about you, Brad? What's your experience with them? Like, can you?
Well, they're difficult. And of course, from regenerative injection standpoint, I have people who come in and say, I've got Ehlers-Danlos, and the only thing I've found that's ever helped me is Prolotherapy. And I used to get Prolotherapy in this other place. And, now I've moved to Austin. And so we need to keep doing this, right? And for me, it's not satisfying because I don't want to just inject everything all over the place. I want to be a little more strategic about it. And also, I've seen the tissue changes that happen with manual therapies, and like, it doesn't always have to be as invasive as what I do. So, and you have to treat so much with regenerative injection in EDS patients in so many different places, and it's expensive, and it's like, it's not going to be accessible to most people. And so there's got to be, again, a better balance between people being able to apply their own manual supports and therapies to maintain themselves, rather than, as soon as I decompensate, I need to go get Prolotherapy, right? It just doesn't make sense to me. So I really want to hear more about being able, because the other thing that people want is something they can do for themselves, right? Because it gives them such a sense of control. And when you're in chronic pain and you're subluxing and you're going into spasm, it's like a feeling of terrors that people get when they go, oh no, it's happened again. I'm going to I'm panicking that. And it's like, if they know of some of these things that you guys do with CP kids that could actually help them tone that down, right?
Can I jump in? Because I think, Diane Woodruff, would you mind sharing? Because I think you said you've worked with these people successfully as well, right?
Thank you, Susan. I have done a little bit of work with them, but not extensive. But the idea that you need three-dimensional movement, you need to understand how to do three-dimensional movement in a systematic way, and do it on a regular basis. This is something you can learn for yourself. It is actually deceptively simple. Once you understand the kinesphere, and once you understand the basic patterns in the body, that's not that hard to learn, so that then you maintain. Yes, and then you go to someone for an extreme situation or what have you. Anyway, I fully agree with the idea that you need systematic three-dimensional movement, and it works for, this is not just for ED, this works for everybody. We all need this. This is the reason people get injured in life, period, is lack of variety of movement. And most people don't know what that means or how to generate that, because they think of biceps curls and this kind of thing. No, it's not about that. It's about using the body in space, right? So these shapes, it's out there. It's out there to learn and to enjoy. Yeah.
That's helpful. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, that's if, and I will use again what I've learned from Mr. Blyum, if you can capture those movements and bring them back to your body. And if your tensional system is okay, that happens naturally. Yes. And then Brad said the same last time. He said we don't have to exercise ourselves to keep ourselves like healthy. Like, no, don't get me wrong. It's good if we exercise, but honestly, if we don't, we are kind of okay. We're better if we exercise, but if we don't, just by moving, by breathing, by doing the regular stuff that we should be doing, we shouldn't be just sitting on the desk all day long, right? But I don't need to do a specific type of exercise to be healthy. I just do my normal stuff and that's enough. But when you don't have that tensional system using those internal movements to feed the system like 24/7, then you're in trouble. then you need to capture that. And that's why the wrapping is working so well for us. That's why when you are containing that, and maybe with those cases will work as well, you are maximizing the movement that it's happening because it's just happening, right?
Yeah.
Well, you
And
see,
that's for
I
me
mean,
what kills me.
may I throw one kind of quote that I was trying to like popularize, right? So you see, the thing is that what we have to think about, like my problem with the whole thing is that like we are commoditizing the movement and the muscle. You have to understand muscle is freaking gold. It's gold. It's, if you think about the cost of the muscle fiber, how much it costs to maintain, what kind of it's a wild beast that you have to control, how much it costs, how many thousands of fibers you need to put it under control and to convert it into something useful, because otherwise if you let this beast out, it just destroys everything. And then muscle is gold. So that what we want, when we talk about the tensional system, what we want to make sure that every single activity of the muscle fiber kind of gives us the most bang for our buck, so that it kind of gets the largest spread and the largest reach that is possible. And that's the idea of those. But if you have some weaknesses, some uncontrolled crimps, some disconnects like in the ADS thing, so what happens then, basically that wave, like you're really not getting much for your gold, like you're getting 10 times less. So the idea of this additional wraps and so on is basically how to build those peridynamic bridges so you can get more out of the available, muscle gold.
Yes.
Mhm.
We do have to come to a unfortunately. We are welcome. You're welcome to stay in the after party. This is after we close the YouTube streaming. So I'm gonna ask. Well, first I'm gonna thank you both, Leonid and Brad, to
Well, and we should thank you for being, like such a motor of the whole thing. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah,
Such a
and
pleasure.
I'm sure it's. I mean, we could talk for hours and hours, and I know for sure Leonid and I could say up to whatever 5 in the morning talking and having deep conversations. That sometimes I get, what are you saying? I don't get it. But with you, Brad, I'm super excited to know more. And honestly, I've been asking the parents that I'm working with, listen, you should get into, ask him, like, because I maybe we can do something together to really, really help these kids. And that's my
that would
goal.
feel like the fulfillment of a purpose that I have. It's been there a long time. So,
and I think both Leonid and I, we can really help in terms of informing based on what we have done so far. So that would be amazing. Okay, so I would say, Graham, are you ready for the sponsors?
Yes, that's fine, Mariana. Thank you.
Oh.
Are you there? He froze. Okay. Susan, do you want to say something while we get him back? About next week, maybe?
The transatlantic cable has been cut, So,
we want
to beg your pardon?
Oh. Yes, can you repeat?
Right.
You were gone for a little bit. Can you?
Okay, well, I'm here again.
Okay.
So we're starting with Handspring Publishing in Scotland, who produce a wide range of books suitable for manual and movement therapy professionals. And they offer a generous discount in the Biotensegrity archive mailing list on our Zoom participants. They also produce a weekly newsletter called Springboard, which you can join from their website. We're also supported by Chris Clancy's educational organisation, Embodied Biotensegrity in Vancouver, which provides an excellent resource for those of you looking to learn more about biotensegrity with several different courses. We look at Artifact Pro of Madrid, Spain, where you can find wonderfully constructed tensegrity models with an anatomical bias. Artifact Pro also offers a generous discount. We then look at the fasciahub.com, which is starting with a full day of talks on the fascial pelvis on Saturday, the 28th of November. So register soon. That's thefasciahub.com. And finally, let you know about recordings from last week's Integrated Biotensegrity with Lisa Babiat, Paul Thornley, and Rachel Tudor, which is now available. And I believe the details are in the chat. So thank you. Back to you, Mariana.
And
Susan, yes, you want to talk about next week?
Yeah, for those who missed last weekend, Rachel and Lisa and Paul's event was really great. So I do highly recommend that you take advantage of that opportunity. Everybody articulates this stuff differently. Everybody brings it into their own experience and gives us such rich new possibilities for understanding. And I also, for that reason, recommend all the Trailblazers work and activities that Chris Clancy's doing with her group, because we get into amazing discussions in a much smaller format, so we're all upping each other's game. It's a really wonderful thing. Now, next week, we're going to continue, Neil Galloway's going to continue his anatomy and movement series, and this time focusing on the pelvis, which, if you're into pelvises, that means 2 fabulous pelvis events, one here at the Tea Party next week, right? And then the Fascia Hub is doing the Biotensegrity focused pelvis event, and Neil's going to be with both of them, but we're going to have Anna Crowell next week. Anna, give a wave. Anna's here right now, and she's done some amazing research on pelvic organ prolapse, and it's going to be really interesting here when you hear how what she's doing links in to everything that was discussed here today in terms of twisted perceptions and how you can get things repaired that people are telling you are not repairable, all kinds of great stuff. And Steve's going to be part of that as well. Also, regarding those of you who were here last week when we did the math, art, and biology event that was so amazing with Dinah and Elizabeth, Chris, you've got something that Wilbur shared, right?
Yeah, I do. I put it in the chat already, Susan. Wilbur went out for a walk, as he often does, hiking, and he took a bunch of images of hyperbolics. So and he wanted to share with us because he couldn't be here today. So it's in the chat for you. It's called Life Force ET. And I see Kathy's got her hyperbolic in her hands. If you want to pull it up, looks beautiful, Kathy.
All right. Oh man, mine are so pathetic looking. So Brad or Mariana, are we doing closing toast?
Yes, Brad, you want?
Oh, there's a closing toast.
Yeah.
I haven't seen the closing toast.
Well, you'll see it when you do it, right?
I've got my little bit of iced coffee left. See, I'm in Texas, so it's still warm here. So I think to our teachers, the kids with cerebral palsy.
Yeah.
And I love that perspective, Leonid. That's, you got me on that one. That's, we value them as our teachers. That is the truth.
Morphological diversity, yes.
Yes.
So cheers to them and to what is possible. Okay, well, thank you everyone for being here. Yes, and hope to see you next week. Bye-bye.